In America and in the world, have we reached the point of no return? Well, what a question. The point of no return. The question is one that we need to address, and Pastor Billy Crone is with us today to talk about it in one perspective. And Billy, you have put out a 4-DVD series and a book, both of which are titled The Mass Murder of Children. You did not pull any punches in that title.
Yeah, because Gary, we at a time such as this, we need to call it for what it is. Abortion is the mass murder of children. And dare I say, our continued silence on this issue has not done any of these children certainly a favor who are being murdered. But dare I say, it's not doing even the ladies who've gone down this route a favor, because statistically, this is something that will always, 100% of the time, bring destruction into their lives. Whether it be depression, whether it be going down a further immoral route, whether it be high usage of drugs and alcohol. In fact, even statistically, Gary, ladies who go down this route with abortion, they are 155% more likely to commit suicide. So we're not doing anybody a favor as a church to keep our mouth silent on it. And so that's why and again, what's going on in our country right now? We're seeing states that are actually passing heartbeat bills. Just when you thought nothing was ever going to change, our country right now is back on this topic. There's signs that things could turn around. Well, this is a time that we're trying to provide a resource. And I'm not trying to say this to boast, but I don't think you're going to find a resource like this out there. It's 4 DVDs, it's 8 studies, it's 9.5 hours of material to get we, the church, the Christian, equipped how to give a loving biblical response to this serious issue.
Now, as far as Bible prophecy is concerned, and of course we here at Prophecy Watchers center our mission around the correct teaching of Bible prophecy. Bible prophecy has a lot to say about the latter days, and Billy, in this presentation, you talk about that.
Yeah.
You talk about where we have come from and where we are going, and you pull no punches again.
Yeah, exactly. And you can just turn to 2 passages, and of course we deal with this obviously from a biblical basis, but you look at Romans chapter 1, and frankly it warns us, this is what's going to happen to your society. It's going to get this kind of brutal, murderous society when you have the audacity. Romans 1, starting with verse 18, says, the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven. So why is this happening? Why are we going to have a 7-year tribulation? Well, it's very clear. It says you had the audacity to turn away from God, and so you created a godless culture. Then it says God starts to give you over to your lust. And then it even says you're even going to start accepting homosexuality and things of that nature, which we've already done as a country. Then you get to the final and third stage. It says now God gives you over to a depraved mind. You still won't turn around even after that? Oh, you ain't seen nothing yet. You're going down the hole, the black hole, a depraved mind. And it says there, and here's what's going to happen to your society. You're going to start to do things, listen, that ought not to be done. And Gary, with all due respect, since 1973, over 61 million children have been murdered in the United States alone. And that's just the United States. Around the world since 1980, 1.5 billion children have been murdered around the world. You know what, Gary? That ought not to be done. We're already in that stage. But he says now you're going to become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, depravity, full of envy, murder, because this is what's going on here. Murder, okay, strife, deceit, malice, gossip, slanders, God-haters. Now, Gary, typically, with all due respect, those who are for this abortion, the mass murder of children, what typically goes along with that?
Well,
God-haters.
God, absolutely.
Right. And so Paul warns us that that's what's going to come. And then he goes on, he says, listen, although they know God's righteous decree that those who do such things deserve death themselves, they not only continue to do these things, but they approve of those who practice them. And that's what's happening in our country. Our country has approved, since 1973, Roe v. Wade, the practice of abortion, i.e. the mass murder of children. Now, what does that got to do with Bible prophecy? Well, Paul says that's a sign too. Guess what? Not just that your society is going into destruction, Romans 1, but 2 Timothy 3, Paul says this is a clear sign that you're living in the last days. Here's what he says, 2 Timothy 3, but mark this, there will be what? Great times in the last days? terrible times in the last days. And here's what it is. Here's the condition of that society as a sign you're in the last days. Number one, people will be lovers of themselves. Well, stop and think about right there. People who typically go down this route, Gary, it's all about self. It's not about being concerned about the child. It's not about being responsible for your decisions and behavior and things of that nature. It's about self. This is impugning myself. I love myself first. And that's what really is the basis for a lot of this. And that's the first thing on the list. The second one is lovers of money. Our second study into this, the first one's on the history of abortion. The second one is the motive of abortion. Now, what's wild, Gary, is they make money off of this procedure. These people, we got them on tape. They admit that they want to be millionaires. As gross as that is, I don't know how else to describe it. But it's because of money. The love of money, the Bible says, is the root of all kinds of evil, certainly this evil. But that's a sign you're in the last days, that these people would do this because they're lovers of money. It goes on and says they'll be boastful and proud and abusive. That's certainly abusive behavior. Disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love. Resorting to this, what kind of a loving, you're without love at that point. Unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control. Listen, brutal. Now, I looked up that word brutal in the Greek. It's anameros, and what it literally means is, and this is a sign you're living the last days, if your society's here, you're in the last days. Brutal is anameros, and it means savagery. That your society will be reduced to just a bunch of savages. It's brutal. And Gary, how do you describe that? There's no better word than that.
And you see it on the street too, Billy. Right now we're beginning to see on the street what can only be described as savagery.
Yeah.
Now, we're talking about Billy's development of a theme here, and I want to take us back to where you start, because I thought that the way you initiated this message was really interesting. Yeah. You went back to that famous old statement, which is, ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny.
That's a mouthful.
Which is a real mouthful. But how was the present condition nurtured to life back in the 19th century? It started with the evolutionary argument.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And it started with the live evolution. And you're mentioning a guy called Ernst Haeckel, who developed what was called embryology. And he was a big liar. In fact, he was committed, I think it was back in 1874, by his own university of fraud. But basically, and they still have, if you can believe this, in the secular textbooks today. But basically, it's the pictures where he supposedly that they have a picture of like a pig and a fish and a frog and a human being. And he brings out these pictures when they were in their early stages. And he says, look, they all look similar because they're tracing their evolutionary history. They're all just blobs of tissue and blah, blah, blah. Well, guess what the problem was? He lied.
He lied.
He was if anything, he was a good artist, but he was very deceptive. And so he lied. He doctored those pictures so that he would have so-called proof for evolution. And it's one thing for that guy to be a liar, but his work that was based on a lie is what influenced a gentleman named Hitler. Hitler was not only an occultist, he was an evolutionist. In fact, we also bring this out. Hitler, you wonder why did he go after the Jewish people? Why of all people on the planet? And there's been a lot of theories. Well, one thing that's been demonstrated is the reason why Hitler went after the Jewish people is because they were the bottom of what was called his hit list. Hitler was an occultist, but an evolutionist. And that worked well with his desire to create this pure genetic race, eugenics, with the Aryan race, that they were the more pure ones, and that's what he's going to bring in the age of utopia to the planet.
And by the way, he thought that the Jews were at the very bottom of the evolutionary cycle.
Right.
They were primitives who had to be destroyed.
Exactly, and he felt that the Jewish people were close to pure ape.
Yeah.
And so if he's going to create this master race of pure genetic super people, right, then this was his hit list. He started with the Jews because they were at the bottom, but most people don't realize if he would have succeeded, he would not have stopped. The next people on the list were the black African communities. Then he went to the Orientals. Then he was going to go to the Slavics, and on the way up until he was left with just the master race.
Aryan.
Exactly. Now, that stemmed from Haeckel, who lied, who brought into this mindset that we need to create a pure evolutionary society, right? And so Hitler operated on that. Now, what most people don't realize is somebody else picked up on that idea, this idea of eugenics. Of course, eugenics, meaning good genes, right? You got to have good genes. That's what it is. And so was a lady named Margaret Sanger. Now, who's Margaret Sanger? Margaret Sanger was into eugenics as well, just like with Hitler. That's the one who's the founder of Planned Parenthood, right? Who initial name was the American Birth Control League, but they changed the name later. A little bit too obvious.
Yeah.
But even in their own material, and even with the writings that are still in print today with Margaret Sanger, she was not only a racist, she was into eugenics, and she purposely wanted to get rid of the African American population, as well as anybody that wasn't Caucasian. Talk about racist. But she wanted to do that because she considered them as lesser evolved people, and that they were like human weeds.
And you mentioned lesser evolved, going right back to the evolutionary question. Going back to Darwin and Haeckel that you mentioned, everybody's seen the little textbook pictures of developing embryos and how we go through this cycle of essentially reliving our evolution from the fertilization to the birth process. And you point out, I think, beautifully in your DVD that it's a total lie.
Yeah, it's not only a total lie, it's on record. He was committed with fraud, Gary, back in 1874. How long ago was that? And then you're still using it as supposed proof in the textbooks today to brainwash people? I like what one guy said, man, if that's the only proof you have for evolution, it's time to get a new theory because it's based on a lie. And then what's the only alternative? Think about that, Gary. Think about that premise. So if you purposely put it in a lie, then what does that tell you? You're purposely lying to people, to kids. Why? Because you are, and I don't think it's by chance, go back to Romans chapter 1. Well, how in the world has our society got so godless? Well, you did what Romans chapter 1 says. You've turned away from the obvious existence of God. You can see that through his creation. That's Romans chapter 1. But you have the audacity to say he doesn't exist. In your so-called wisdom, you became fools, he says there. And that's what they've done. Well, here's the thing. What you believe determines how you behave. And if you think that there is no God, you're going to act like it, right? And you create a godless society. And then fast forward, that's what you unfortunately need to fulfill Bible prophecy in the last day, a rise of a godless society. Evolution has its hand in that. But you think about it, again, they're brainwashing kids, and then we wonder why our society's falling apart. Not even just on this issue. How could we get to the point where 61 million plus children are being murdered, and people say they have a right to do that? Well, think of every aspect in our society that's going wrong, right? What you believe determines how you behave. But if we actually think that there's no purpose or reason to life, then why are we so shocked when people are so flippant and so easily take a life? And I'm not talking just about this. I'm talking about murdering other people. You hear stories in the news that this kid wanted to have this kid's a pair of tennis shoes that he couldn't buy, so he shot and killed him. It's like, what? Well, what you believe determines how you behave. If you teach kids that they came from an ape instead of Adam, like God says, then why are you shocked when they act like apes? What you believe determines how you behave. Evolution is the mindset that Paul warned against in Romans chapter 1 that's going to lead to a depraved society to where you become murderous and God-haters, and it's actually leading now to the fulfillment of Bible prophecy of the last days wicked society that would get absolutely brutal. And that's what we're seeing today.
And you're listening to Billy Crone, and I wish we had more than a half hour because the content of these 4 DVDs is really amazing, and I want you to sort of go through the outline with me. First DVD, the history and the motive. Second DVD, the church and the survivors. Third DVD talks about the aftermath and the response. Fourth DVD talks about the future, part 1 and 2. In other words, you've got a very, I think, compelling outline here, just taking step by step by step where we've been, where we're going, and I like the way you put this together. Talk about that a minute.
Well, it was a systematic approach, and again, we wanted to be able to not just gloss over this issue at such a time as this, when this is all going on in our nation's history, and we're seeing, if you will, a crack in the dam. Let's get equipped as Christians thoroughly, biblically, philosophically, in a loving fashion, and let's be a part of the solution. But yeah, we dealt with the history. Where did all this come from? How do we get in this shape in the first place would be the first one. And then, of course, the second one, we dealt with the motive. You know, why are these people doing this? How can they gloss over this idea that you would actually do this to children and destroy women's lives? How can you do money? The scripture says the love of money is the root of all evil. And people are not only making millions and millions of dollars, but people don't realize Planned Parenthood is a business franchise, Gary, in our country and around the world. And it's not $1 million, it's $1 billion corporation. And they're the ones greasing the palms of these people to try to keep this quote unquote legal in our country. So money's a huge part of it. They make money not only off the procedure of the murdering the child in the womb, we also expose that they also make money on the back end with the leftover remains of the child, and they sell those body parts. In fact, we even have one abortion lady who's haggling over the prices on camera, and she admits that she wants to use the proceeds to buy a Lamborghini. I'm not joking. It's all on tape. Oh, and by the way, these are chock full of video interviews, Senate hearings, all kinds of stuff currently going on in our country. In fact, just talk about hot off the press. Just recently on Fox News, Tucker Carlson did, and we got the interview on here, of Stacey Abrams, right? Who was a Georgia legislator. And he asked her about the heartbeat bills that are starting to go across in different states. And you know what her response was? It's on tape, Gary. You got to see it, man. She actually said, it's an abomination. An abomination to protect children from being murdered. And then she goes like this. She said, it's bad for business. That's a direct quote. She says, you got to think about it. If you start outlawing this procedure, it's not only an abomination, but it's an abomination, she says, because of the businesses. It's going to impact the abortion industry. And then she even did this. And the women that work at these industries, I mean, how bad for them? They're not going to have a job. And so it's bad for the economy. It's bad for business. It's like, what? So we have all that kind of current evidence, hot off the press, in here to see what's really going on around our country. But that's the money. That's the motive. Then we get into the church. And what should the church be doing? Well, you think the church should be speaking up. We expose, Gary, that there's actual so-called Christians, actual so-called ministers, so-called churches that are actually supporting the abortion industry. And they're actually being hired by Planned Parenthood to ease the consciences of these ladies that are going through this procedure. And it's like, you got to be kidding me. So we expose all that and as well. Then we get into the aftermath. And this, I think, is very powerful because the aftermath deals with the actual testimonies of a multitude of ladies who've gone through this procedure, who've been duped to go down that route. And 100% of the time, Gary, it affects also their life. A lot of these ladies, they just can't take it. They hold it in. They have nobody to talk to. The church won't talk about it. And so they don't know about the wonderful healing good news that Jesus is willing to forgive you, yes, of even this, and he's willing to heal you. There's hope in Christ. Nobody wants to talk about it. So the stat is, again, ladies who go down this route, 155% higher increased chance of suicide. And so we have to speak up and let these people know. So we deal with that aspect. Then we deal with not only the aftermath, we deal with these survivors. We have multitude of actual babies who are now adults who survived their own murder attempt. And it's like, well, how do you get around that? How can you sit there and still say that this is just a blob of tissue, it's a parasite, it's not a person? Well, here they are as adults now. Most of them are scarred. Some of them have lost limbs because they were taken in the attempt. Some of them have come out with adverse health effects from the procedures, cerebral palsy, but they're still out there and they're still fighting. And so we share their testimonies of what they're saying. And I like what one testimony, this one lady says, listen, you sit there and say that it's all about your right. She says, I am not a right, I'm a human being, right? And so that's a powerful thing. But then, of course, we get into the response. And we have it's about an hour and a half long, right? There's 8 studies, but it's a 90.5-hour study. There's about an hour and a half study on the response. How do we lovingly, biblically respond to these people who say that this is okay, that this is something we should do, and step by step dismantling the argument in love, biblically, philosophically, logically, to get them to think of really what they're doing. And I'll just give you a little teaser. One of the steps that we do is we train people in here, don't use their terminology. Their terminology is code words to hide what's really going on. You know, people say, well, you're against abortion? Well, yeah, I'm against mass murdering children because that's what it is.
Yeah.
And then you flip it around. So you mean to tell me that you're for mass murdering children? You say, well, it's just a fetus. No, it's a baby. Don't use their term fetus. That's seemingly innocuous. You can hide behind that. You can't hide behind the term, it's a baby, right? It's just a blob of tissue, a parasite. No, that's a lie from Ernst Haeckel. That's the lie of evolution. That's a child from conception. Oh, it's just pregnancy reduction. No, it's not. It's murdering systematically children. right? And on it goes. That we don't use their terms, so we couch that. And then they say, well, what's the big deal? It doesn't affect you, right? Yes, it does affect me, and we demonstrate this. Number one, we demonstrate how taxpayer dollars are being funded to this industry, and it's an industry, the mass murder of children, and we pay for that, Gary. And they want to say it isn't. We bring the proof. It is. It is. And that's why you also see they're in an uproar that in our country right now, they're also talking about not just the heartbeat bill, they're talking about what? Defunding Planned Parenthood, right? Our taxpayers gives them millions of dollars to do this every year. So that affects me. We also, just in the last few months, the legislation in Washington state is forcing churches to provide abortion coverage in their health care. So don't tell me this doesn't affect me. It certainly affects me. And that's not even talking about the long-term effects on society. Think about this, Gary. You're murdering your future. What if, and this could be a possibility, what if that child that God had in that womb was the child that God was going to grow up to be the one who had a cure for cancer? Not anymore. What about all the teachers and the preachers and all the people that could have a positive benefit on society that will never be? So don't tell me this doesn't have an effect on us. And on it goes. But one more thing, just a quick synopsis. The last two studies, we deal with the future. And Gary, the future is not looking good. Our silence, it's moving now outside the womb. We open up an ugly Pandora's box. And these people are now looking at not just making money, $1 billion industry, not just making money off abortion, the mass murder of children. They're now wanting to, what's going on in the country? They're wanting to go outside the womb, and they're also the same states that are wanting to make sure that we have the ability to mass murder children are the same states are now who want to create an industry of getting rid of the elderly. It's called euthanasia. The same states, it's going on right now, Gary, it's getting close to 30 states right now, have either passed or are working on legislation to pass a physician-assisted suicide. What's that? That's to kill adults. I mean, hey, if you're going to get rid of this person that you say is just a detriment to your life, aren't you tired of taking care of that old person too? It's happening right now.
So we're going through a progressive desensitization of society.
Exactly.
In which the elderly, at a certain point, might be deemed unworthy even to remain alive and marched off to a center where they are never seen again.
Interesting you mentioned that, because that was a warning by Dr. Nathanson. We have him on tape, and he warned 15 to 20 years ago of what's coming. But he was the guy, most people don't realize, he was the guy that actually helped Roe v. Wade to get passed. And he even admitted that the numbers that they came up with to say, if we don't pass this legislation and have these ladies to get to abortion industries, thousands are going to die. He admitted they inflated those numbers. It's not true. But anyway, so he finally came around because he saw in a sonogram what he was doing. And so he wasn't even saved at that point. He quit. But this guy warned, he says, if we don't stop this now, I got it on tape, he says it's going to go outside the womb, and he says they're going to create a secondary industry. And he says they'll probably call it something like thanatorium. Of course, the Greek word thanatos is death.
Right.
Thanatorium. And he says, and that will be the place, just like you take this, you go to this place to get rid of your child, this is the place that you go for a fee, of course, and you get rid of that elderly loved one. Right?
Seems like there was a movie made some time ago, a sci-fi movie about that very thing.
Exactly. Yeah, there's multitudes of...
It's a deep-seated fear in humanity because I think deep down we all know where it's going to go once we forget God.
Well,
there's only one direction.
Exactly. It's going downhill. And dare I say, too, another thing that we bring up with that aspect is it's going to get even worse than that. But we also expose the people who are currently behind this movement, and we need to get equipped with what's going on. And I say this, listen, I mean, when we get equipped and speak up on this issue, we're not only speaking up on behalf, listen, we're not only speaking up on behalf of the children who are being slaughtered, we're not only speaking up on behalf of these women whose lives are being destroyed, but Gary, it's going outside the womb now. It might be your own life that you're speaking up.
True.
Because we also expose one of the architects of the Obama healthcare system, okay, has admitted, this recently came out. Everybody says, when it first came out, people were saying, there's death panels. They're going to have this panel that's going to decide whether or not you get that operation.
I remember.
Right? Yeah. And they mocked anyone who said that. Well, guess what? It's come out. It's in there. Now, of course, it's not called the death panel. It's called the IPAB, an Independent Payment Advisory Board. Okay, but guess what it means? They're going to decide whether or not you get to live or not and have that operation, and whether you're costing the system that much money. But anyway, so we expose that, but we also expose the fact that the architecture of that guy, he recently came out, we've got the actual clip, he recently came out and said that if it were up to him, and this is a guy who wrote the healthcare law, that if it were up to him, we shouldn't live past the age of 76.
Oops.
And that if we need, at that point, go
Wow.
back to Dr. Nathanson's prediction 15, 20 years ago, thanatoriums, he says, and at such point, you just need to be taken care of because you're costing the system too much money.
Wow. It's been a pretty dark pathway that we've followed on this program. Let's brighten it up a little bit with some scripture. I'm going to read from Psalm 139:14, where it says, I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. My substance was not hid from thee when I was made in secret and curiously wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. And this is David talking about his own conception and birth. He didn't have a doubt in the world about the fact that he was viable in the womb.
Oh, yeah. Well, and again, in our study on the response of abortion, we deal with scripturally how the Bible is very replete, repeatedly, evidence that life begins at conception. These are real people, and you shouldn't do that. But you talked about, it's a dark subject, yeah, but we got to deal with it. And then you mentioned, let's lighten it up. Again, this isn't something that as Christians we should shy away from. Because,
good point.
Because Gary, listen, we not only need to speak up again on behalf of the children, but of these ladies. These ladies are suffering. Oh, they got the mask on, they act like it's cool, but deep down inside, 100%, they are hurting, their lives have been destroyed. And so as Christians, we need to engage in this conversation. We're not trying to put salt on a wound, of course not, but we have to have a conversation so we could lead them to the solution. And the solution is, but if you would just, as 1 John 1:9 says, confess your sins, he, God, is faithful and just to forgive you your sins and cleanse you from all unrighteousness. They can know that there's hope in Jesus Christ. They can begin to be healed again. We owe it to them to let them know that they don't have to live with the ramifications and suffer, that there's hope in Jesus Christ. We've got to get that message out.
And you've done it well. The book, $25, the DVD, $25, Abortion, the Mass Murder of Children. Watch the Prophecy Watchers website. You just go to the online bookstore, click on it, and scroll right down, and you'll find these, the book and the DVD. Plus, as we do here from time to time, we put things in packages, and we've got a couple of other books. One by Jeff Kinley called The End of America, with a good question mark, and he asks the question rhetorically that we've been asking in this program. And the other book by Jeff Kinley, Wake the Bride. All four of these books, that is the books and the DVD, yours for a gift of $50. Free shipping anywhere in the United States. Just go to prophecywatchers.com, scroll down to the online bookstore, and it'll be there for you to see. Billy, oh, wow, what can I say?
Yeah.
I'm glad you were here today.
Well, I'll tell you what, that's the Lord. And again, for such a time as this, Gary, we need to get God's truth out.
I'm Gary Stearman. You keep watching. We are. Thanks for joining us on Prophecy Watchers. You can find us on the web at prophecywatchers.com, where you can sign up for our free email newsletter. In the meantime, keep watching, everybody, and we'll see you soon.